Hello, Bertold. I see you there.
Hi.
So let's give it a couple of minutes.
So Bertold will join us for the first 30 to 45 minutes. He can't stay the whole time because I only just let him know to join this morning. He's very kindly and spontaneously shifted a few things around.
Okay. We are honoured. Are you in the same place, you two?
No, I live in the southwest of Germany, hilariously actually where Bertold is originally from. He lives close to the Passive House Institute's headquarters in Darmstadt.
So I'm in Darmstadt and Giorgia is in Stuttgart. It's 200 kilometers about. But we are in Zoom, well?
Well, exactly. It doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter. Yeah, this morning I've been speaking to people in Bulgaria, people in Uganda, people in Egypt. You forget you're in South London. It doesn't really matter anymore.
Mm.
Okay, so I think we will kick off. So some people have got to leave early, as we said. So off we go. So we're recording it, and then please everybody have a look at that later and then promote it. So my name is Sam Baker. Delighted to have you, my panelists, with me today, but also, of course, people online and people who see this afterwards. What I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes, just first of all, talking very briefly from a layman's perspective, and I do emphasize that, not an expert perspective about COP27. Talk a little bit about Walk2COP27, which is the initiative that has brought us together today. And then finally, just talk about the session that we're having today. And this will be short, don't worry. So I think that sort of reflections on COP27. So I walked from London to Glasgow last year. I really enjoyed it for COP26. It was tremendous. And there was a high level of awareness of COP and what it was, particularly in schools. It felt exciting. There were obviously a lot of people in Glasgow from all sorts of different walks of life, a lot of people demonstrating, a lot of activism, and it felt very exciting. And I think the conclusion as somebody who isn't an expert in these processes was a little bit disappointing, to put it mildly. However, I did retain that dynamism and enthusiasm I had from just seeing and experiencing so many different views coming together under the same cause. That was exciting, but a lot of that was sort of grassroots, NGO, etc. So I think when we looked at COP27, it seems to me like there's a lot of unfinished business. So one thing, of course, is the nationally defined contributions. So we were hoping at COP26 that those were going to be announcements which would keep us safely within the Paris Agreement, so to 2 degrees or below, and preferably 1.5 degrees. And as we know, it's more like 2.4. I think that's the lowest estimate I've seen anyway. So 2.4, so significantly higher. So Egypt, super important to get revised NDCs out there. And, I don't know. I tried to sort of find out how many revised NDCs have actually been published. I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the number was only 18 countries had done this, and not the biggest emitters either. I don't know what the latest is, but obviously fingers crossed that we really see a strong set of revised nationally defined contributions. And for those who don't know what those are basically just plans to reduce your emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. So really, really important and symbolically important, because it shows that everybody's thinking and working about this together and thinking about their own role and the role that they can play. So I think mitigation obviously is super important, and we hope to see that up there. In terms of adaptation, I think there's a recognition that perhaps there's been a lot of focus on mitigation and perhaps less focus on adaptation. And as we understand, I guess that we're going to overshoot the Paris Agreement, the concerns and the ramifications of global warming and weather events increase. And so I suppose that then is driving everybody to think harder about adaptation and what that actually means. What does resilience mean? How do you define it? And we are a partner. So Walk2COP27 is a partner to Race to Resilience. And you can see some good work has been done to try and think about exactly what that means, how you codify it, and ultimately how you predict it and how you finance adaptation as well. Mm-hmm. So then the Third bit, I guess you move into finance quickly from adaptation, because the conversation very quickly gets into money and sort of who pays for the things that have happened and who pays for the preparation to stop things happening in the future. And of course, we get into this very difficult conversation, which says the people who caused climate change, the anthropogenic element anyway, which is of course emissions increase, the people who caused it aren't necessarily the people suffering the most. And so therefore, how should we think about that? There's been some very interesting pronouncements from the Pakistani Premier, talking about the need. I think they were saying that the damage caused is going to cost them over 35 billion to address. Now, the fund at the moment agreed, I think it was in 2013, for, if you like, the richer nations to give to the poorer nations in order to adapt, but also to address challenges from previous weather events, was 100 billion. So a third of that's gone in 1 year, just in one country, for one extreme weather event, potentially, if that's where it went. So I think the financing element, when we get into questions about how we pay for the challenges that we faced and we prepare to face in the future, is very thorny. And at COP26, loss and damage, the idea of a loss and damage fund was rejected. We had 2 countries, including Scotland, who actually put some money up and symbolically towards loss and damage, or loss and damage fund. But clearly we're going to see much more of that at COP27, not least because it is the African COP, in inverted commas, and large parts of Africa, as we know, are suffering significantly from climate change and its ramifications. So I'm sure there'll be fantastic side events, and there'll be lots of progress on other issues which perhaps aren't sitting under those big buckets. So for instance, in Glasgow, people seem to think that the methane agreements and the agreements on deforestation were both very positive, which is great. So we hope to see lots of progress sort of off the main agenda as well. But I think that I finish this with just saying, if we can, fly the flag for awareness and understanding of what this is in people's, what this is, what does it mean in terms of addressing or combating climate change, and make it something which, 3 years ago, I'd never heard of COP, to be honest, right? And that is a travesty. It's my fault, but it's also the fault of the system and the general level of awareness in the world. So if we can do what the great things we're doing, but to raise awareness and allow people to understand that this is a rallying point where governments are on show, and they need to be able to understand that they're helping us address our concerns and challenges and not protecting us by not moving more quickly when it comes to mitigation, adaptation, and the other important bilateral agreements. So just 2 seconds on backdrop, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, in the conversation. Of course, the backdrop has been particularly challenging, certainly in my country and also across Europe, but also in other countries. We might start in the backdrop in terms of weather events. Of course, we're seeing an increase, or we're certainly seeing high profile, continued, massive, significant one-off challenges never seen before around weather. And the European heat wave, for instance, was one example. So records broken. And just one thing in the UK, which came up in one of our town halls, our railways, unlike Spain, apparently the steel that they use in the railways are only sort of resilient up to, I don't know, 42 or 43 degrees. And we're pretty much at that now, or not at that, all summer, but for at least, a reasonably extended period of time. That's our railway infrastructure. So the ramifications are just enormous. So I think one thing, we've seen those events continue. The second thing, of course, we've seen, the back end of COVID. COVID hadn't gone away, but also the supply chain implications of COVID. And they suddenly collided with the war that we're seeing at the moment. And thoughts out with everybody who's suffering from that directly and indirectly. But obviously this has given rise to increases in the cost of energy, driven in large part by fossil fuel, but also then calls for energy security. And so in the UK, for instance, the new government, the new Prime Minister has offered up 100 new oil and gas licenses. We've opened up fracking again, or we will do. Hopefully it won't get through, but it probably will be. And unfortunately, this is now being positioned politically polarized, as you can have growth, or you can have, you can address the cost of climate change. And classically, critically, horrifically, one of our MPs actually said, we can't afford to invest in our plans for net zero this year. I mean, imagine the language. We can't afford what framing, and this is an intelligent person who's a senior politician. So what framing in their mind is it that suddenly we've got this polarization between actually addressing climate change, which is going to be a huge challenge for us, every single one of us, and then a financial growth orientated outcome in that we can say we can't afford it. So that political polarization, I think we're seeing in other countries as well, and we're also seeing it in Germany. So those are challenges. I think at the same time, and partially through the work we're doing on Walk2COP27, it is so uplifting, exciting, interesting to speak to so many people in so many countries who are concerned about this and who are doing something about it. It's fantastic. And it feels like, if we can all, just link up a little bit more, we can amplify our efforts, we can raise our voices, that, that's where the change is really going to happen. It's getting all those people together who care, and then that'll change the political system, that'll change the larger organizations, and through that, we make some progress. So that is uplifting, and that is a source of great hope for me. So just in terms of today, and Walk2COP27, so Walk2COP27, we had a Walk2COP26, which is a physical thing. Walk2COP27, the idea of this is mass participation. It's a mass participation initiative. And the idea was to sort of notionally walk from Scotland down to Egypt. We've got 12 town halls. So these are meetings where we bring together people to be noisy, to express their opinions, hopefully to get shouted at by the other people who dial in. And this is one of those town halls. So this is number 5. And we started in Scotland, we had England, we did France, Belgium, and now we're here, sort of here, inverted commas, in Germany. So we've got 12 of those running down. Some are hybrid, some are virtual, some are big, some are small, but all of them are super interesting, and the content is great. And the fact is it's colliding lots of different people's opinions together. The second part to this is walking with us. So the idea is that we mobilize lots of people wherever they are. They could be in China, they could be in India, they could be in the US, but you join as an individual, you register as a team on an app, and you walk, you run, or you cycle, and you clock that distance, or travel in a wheelchair, you clock that distance, and that distance gets commuted into trees planted by the Jane Goodall Institute in Burundi. So the hope is we've got all these people walking, and then of course we've got these town halls to show us this notional way. And at the moment we've got 1,300 people walking, we've got 155 teams, we want 10 times that number, we want to plant 300, 400, 500, possibly even 1 million trees. We've got funding for about 250,000. I know I can get more funding if we get more walking, more activity, more people. So the idea is we're getting this big movements, moving down to Egypt notionally, and we've got the town halls to engage them. And we've got a third way of engaging them, which is Clubhouse. So Clubhouse is a social media audio platform. So on our website, we've got an inventory of the different things that people are talking about. So any participant can put up their hand, ask for a Clubhouse slot, and we'll give it to them. And this morning, for instance, we heard from the Egyptian Clothing Bank, a phenomenal enterprise focusing on textiles recycling. We've got, I think this afternoon, we've got ESG. Last night we had, gosh, what did we have last night? It was so interesting, I've forgotten. So anyway, a massively eclectic mix of super interesting topics. So anybody's got a perspective to share, get on there, promote it yourselves, we'll promote it, and let's hear your perspective. Okay, so that's what Walk2COP27 is. So please get involved. Everybody's listening. All the panelists who aren't already engaged, have a look at the website. That's where it holds all the information. And then there's a variety of places to dive off from. But the big thing is really just to keep or find new ways, hopefully, or additional ways to amplify what we're doing and then to connect with other people. And I didn't mention it, sorry, the 3 key objectives of Walk2COP27 is firstly to educate. We will be educated today, I know, by you super panelists. The second is around solidarity, so us feeling we're in this together and that we can do something together. And then the third is connections, making connections, be they cross-country, within an organization, cross-type of organization, cross-demographic, making connections which allow us to be more effective in our fight against climate change. So that's where we are. So if I'm just going to share my screen and talk about, for 2 minutes, I will talk about today. So as I said, today is today's our 5th town hall. We've got some super panelists. Now, the sort of reason from my perspective why I think they're particularly interesting, other than the fact that they're interesting people. So Carolina, it's climate governance. So we're hoping to hear the angle about climate governance from Carolina. In terms of Diego, a phenomenally ambitious approach to the Global Impact Alliance to think about how we move forward and we behave effectively, both as organizations and systemically. In terms of Giorgia and Bertold from Passive House, some very concrete, specific, tried and tested approaches to helping us think about emissions with quality of life benefits as well in the housing stock. Sisira majors on, or has majored in the past on water and does at the moment, and the confluence of climate change and water and sanitation, and has also contributed to previous IPCC reports. So very happy, delighted to have you with us as well. And we've got Caroline from the Green Faith International Network. And I think faith, I didn't mention that as well about COP26. I think the faith groups actually were well organized and played a really important role at COP26. And this is one of the reasons I've reached out specifically to faith groups of all different types of denomination to try and include them in this event that we've got. So that's what we're looking forward to. So what I'd like to do now is to offer each panelist 4 to 5 minutes to talk about their perspective on climate change. So we'll go in the order, left to right: Carolina, Diego, Giorgia, Sisira, and Caroline. If people have burning questions for the panelists, clarifications, by all means, panelists, please step in. If we have that from the floor, I'll keep an eye on Q&A and we can ask those questions as well. But generally, we're trying to get those 4 or 5 minutes out, listen hard, and then embark on the discussion. And in terms of the discussion, the idea, of course, people have got global thoughts on climate change, but we also do want to educate people on what's happening in Germany. So the conversation or the questions thereafter will be grouped into 4. The first is really reflections on the impact of climate change and how we're feeling it, be that professionally, personally, in our organization at a national level. The second is the good examples of the things we're doing about it. So specific things that we're doing about it, which might be around activism, it might be technical contributions. We'll talk about that. The third is then how do we scale those things? And then the final question is what 1 or 2 critical things would you do, would you want to see done at any level in order to fundamentally change the depth, the breadth, and the speed of the transition in Germany? Okay, so if you do have to go, panelists, put up your hand and we'll want you to answer that last question before you go. So let us start.
Yes, thank you very much, Sam, for your introductory comments. And yeah, I feel the experiences you shared are pretty much also the same experience I shared. Like I was also quite deluded from COP26, not much happened. And also many people were like 3 years ago, didn't hear about climate change or didn't take care of it. But I think since this 3 years, a lot of things have changed. So I believe nowadays you can't run successfully a business without taking sustainability into consideration and also climate change. So from my personal story, I started learning more, educating myself in the direction of climate change, and also did an MBA in sustainability management. And while doing that, I thought, who are the most powerful bodies, persons in an organization to push this subject? And it was for me very obvious that it is the supervisory board. So in German, it's Aufsichtsrat. So I started to study them and what possibilities they have, what do they need to do from a law perspective, and also what can they do. And wrote my master thesis about climate governance in supervisory boards and Aufsichtsräten, which you can also Google. And what I found most interesting was that study already showed that in 2020, so like more or less 3 years ago, only 5% of supervisory board members were expert in climate governance. So it was like most of the supervisory board members weren't dealing with climate governance, even if I think nowadays you can't really say, well, I wasn't aware of climate change and the risks and also the opportunities coming from it. So I studied that. And the first thing I did was studying what is governance. So also to explain a little bit on that, it's like the rules and regulations you have established in your companies, which are at one side, the legal regulations, on the other side, like governance standards, for example, and on the third side, internal guidelines. So this all are like the structure which we call governance. And if you put it like in the perspective of climate, then it should be related to climate. So I developed some recommendations for supervisory board members. I developed like 15 steps. And just to make it short, I think the first thing which supervisory board members should do is to educate themselves and just to start. It's like, I think it's also same when I speak in my position as COO of IBIZA. And it's just like, don't be afraid to just start, take a small step and start to educate yourself. So in this 15 steps, I lay out some possibilities. And one, of course, for supervisory boards are to organize themselves to decide like who's taking care in our committees about climate change, the risks and the opportunities. Do we do it all together? Is one person in charge? So this would be one big thing supervisory board members could do. The second one I would like to mention is remuneration of the board of directors, like the CEO, CFO, etc. It's the job of supervisory board members to appoint those people. So there you have already a big possibility to have influence. And the second one also to decide how the remuneration works. So, and the third would be also to ask a lot of questions during your work, like what is the company doing, which standards are used. And the fourth is also to never stop educating yourself, like look out for your network. Is there a network available? For example, the Climate Governance Initiative, which was initiated by the World Economic Forum. They have chapters all over the world, also in Germany. So for example, it could be also good to find people, like-minded people, and to connect each other. So those were like the main findings of, I think, very easy steps, just like to start and to push the topic forward. So yeah, that would be all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. So questions to governance and business and how business are reacting to Carolina later. So Diego.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, my perspective, it's quite different. This last years, all the activities that governments and society are running to resolve the problem about climate change, for me, it's not so effective because all the time we see this focus in one subject only. And the work that I start to create these last 2 years, it's about bringing the systemic thinking to play. So for me right now, it's not about climate change, it's about an ecological crisis. So it's very different perspective. The entire nature and our planet, it's basically adaptive complex systems. So we need to handle with that looking like an adaptive complex system. And to do that, we need to take the perspective about systemic thinking to really understand the dynamic of the systems, the flows of the systems, and yeah, focus only in climate change. It's something that maybe we can propose a lot of actions, but these actions are not doing the right thing because they are not connected with the complexity of this system. So yeah, this last 2 years, we are running a project to create a new assessment to help companies and society to take this systemic thinking and holistic view about this change, about the goals that we have to sustainability. So with that, we can really address the problems and take good actions to solve the problems properly. So like these last years, we see a lot of floods, a lot of events that people call problems from the climate change. But in the end, when we look deeply on the events that happens, we see a lot of other connections. So the floods that happen, we see cities waterproofed, we see changing in forests. So the forest is very important to control floods, because if we change like the interception that the forest can have in the rains, we can improve the runoff of the water, and this can create the flood. So it's all systemic, and we are looking right now just for 1 point to CO2 and the GHGs, but we forget the water cycle, we forget all the other aspects in the environmental. So yeah, for me, right now, what we need do most is teach people about systemic thinking, give them a little about ecological literacy, because right now most of our society don't understand the planet that we live. And this is the most important thing. We need to understand the ecology of this planet. So to be able to live here in harmony and aligned with nature. So yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Diego. And I think that, yeah, in the Q&A, it'd be really interesting to understand if there are any good examples of that, for instance. I think it's a, it's a beautiful concept and representation. The question is, can we learn from people who've done stuff? So Giorgia, and maybe Bertold as well. So maybe one of you wants to go first, the other one wants to chip in.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start, and then I'll hand over to Bertold, who I've invited to talk specifically about the situation in Frankfurt and in Germany at large, because I deal much more at the international level, and I wanted an expert on what's going on locally to join us. So my name is Giorgia. I direct the International Passive House Association, which is the global network of passive house stakeholders. So that really includes everybody along the design and construction chain, but also press, policymakers, and any kind of decision makers that are included in getting buildings constructed and or retrofitted. So we have well over 6,000 members worldwide, and we work together to promote the Passive House Standard, which is a building performance standard. So it's not a set design approach. It's not a requirement for a building to look a certain way. It comes down to the physics of a building, making sure that it is airtight and insulated according to the local climate, that it's got mechanical ventilation, because people do like to breathe in their buildings. And if you've got airtight buildings, something to think about. And we've really seen a huge increase in interest in passive house these last few years, partly because people are beginning to really consider the operational costs of their buildings, especially right now with the energy crisis, but also in part because after COVID, we've all seen the issues with air exchange rates and the health and comfort of people in their homes, but also in other types of buildings. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in Passive House, not just for the energy savings and thus financial savings across the life cycle, but also the health and comfort that comes from swapping out the air regularly and making sure you've got a fresh, healthy, mold-free environment, which is a bit of an ongoing issue here in Germany with what you'll hear from Germans called Lüften, which is to air out your building. And it is a little bit of a necessity on the daily, which can get quite uncomfortable in the winter time. So it's nice to have a building that does that for you. So we do a whole lot of different things, but what we really focus on is advocating for education amongst professionals in the industry. So your architects, your tradespeople, and any policymakers making the decision on what new houses, districts and public buildings will look like. And also making sure that the public understands the benefits long term. We do spend well over 95% of our time indoors when we're talking about countries in Europe. Part of that's because it gets so cold in winter. And part of that's just because of the way that our lives are run nowadays. We go from home to jumping in the car or public transport to work, where we spend 8 hours in the office and then we go home again, or maybe we go to a bar or a public library or pick up the kids from school. So we're spending an awful lot of time indoors, and we really want to focus on making that environment healthy and comfortable, but also energy efficient. Because if we're looking at buildings from the life cycle perspectives, especially, it's the operational energy that's really costing our environment. It's all of that energy that goes into heating and increasingly here in Europe into cooling. And so what Passive House does, and what the name might suggest, is it uses passive heating and cooling sources. So we make the building so energy efficient that it only needs a very small amount of active heating or cooling if you're in, a more difficult climate. And in some climates, you might not need either. Opening the windows as it gets cooler at night would be enough to cool the building down. And the body heat or your exhaust heat from cooking or turning the television on is enough to heat it. And I think the only other thing I really wanted to touch on in the introduction was that despite the name Passive House, it is for all buildings. So we have some really cool projects happening worldwide, and specifically why I have introduced or asked Bertold to join us is that we have in Frankfurt alone, we have Passive House schools. It was one of the first districts or cities in the world to have Passive House legislation requiring Passive House to be included in certain public buildings. We also have a Passive House hospital, which is just about to go into full use. It was opened earlier this year. And we also around Germany have Passive House swimming pools, Passive House museums, and a whole range of other really, really cool things. I think personally my favorite is the Bahnstadt, which is a whole new build district in Heidelberg, which is just incredibly energy efficient and also includes things like cinemas and schools and all of those things that you need as, although whether you need a cinema, but all those things you like to have in a new district. But I'm going to hand over to Bertold. A big thank you for me for being so spontaneous. I have not prepared him at all, but I'm sure he'll do an amazing job regardless.
Thanks, Giorgia.
Yeah, well, thank you, Giorgia. And I'm very impressed about your introduction. So Passive House in a nutshell and all together. And from that, you see, we do a lot of things about communication and educate people and here and there. And I think we are quite successful on the one hand, but as you mentioned in the beginning in your introduction, it seems not to be enough. And this is what I'm really concerned. So to be before going to the Frankfurt situation, but it's quite similar. The real estate sector people working with real estate, doing construction of new houses or renovation and so on, they are, to be honest, not really interested in this subject. The interest is growing, so we see that it's more and more, as Giorgia said. There are more and more people understanding the challenges and understanding what has to be done, but most of them, as soon as this goes to finance and it goes to money, they are really not interested. So it's more important to have golden water taps, to summarize it quite shortly, as to go for better insulation or a ventilation system. And this is what you said before. Some people say we cannot afford the challenges what we have from climate change. And this is what I would say, this is the challenge, to make people aware what we have to do. And the problem is, those who suffer from climate change are not those who make the problem. So we in Germany, we have relatively mild and moderate climate and weather this year. Even summer, the summer was not so hot that we, I think so. It was very easily to overcome. Well, in other parts of the world, it was much worse. Well, so, and by the way, this is somehow the situation in Frankfurt. Yes, we have some large office buildings. We have this hospital, which will now be going into operation this year, hopefully, where many people do this and that, going for better buildings. But in principle, the government of Frankfurt, they have nowadays to struggle against political opponents who say, well, for what do we all this complicated stuff for passive housing? There are other ways to roam, and we will go this and that. So we have to admit that there are many ways to go here and there are renewable energies, and so we can all include it. But in general, the necessity to go for very low energy consumption of buildings for heating and cooling and everything, for most people, for most actors in the market, it's not important enough. So they do not want to spend money. We see that a little bit change, but I'm really concerned that this will be not many enough. Well, we'll see. I hope COP27 will help us to go to get more awareness. But as Diego said, I'm really concerned that we will miss it. Sorry.
Okay, but at least you have part of the solution. I mean, we had somebody from Westminster County Council, which is in London, speaking at one of the events, and she said that 44% of their entire emissions is from the operating of their buildings.
Yeah. That's true. Well,
so anyway, we'll come to that scaling. So thank you for that. So Sisira, can we hear from you?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think hope you will hear me as well. It's clear.
Good. Super clear.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for to be in this prestigious event, and I really like to see that the multi-stakeholders who are working in Germany and also with other countries. After I think 8 years, I'm engaged in for this COP activities. That was in COP 19 in Warsaw. I'm quite actively engaged with the Bund, and then now we are working on more in academic way. So currently, here I am presenting International Waters Association. So we are not based in Germany. So it's an international organization, member-based association, which established in 1971. And we have scientists who are working on water resource management and also around subject area. And so especially what I'm holding as a chair, water quality task force, we are looking at different aspects and different themes around the water quality, and also definitely of the climate change impacts. So by addressing your questions about this perspective, the water quality definitely impact on the climate change. There's no questions. And we see that in this year in Germany, after 1881, in Germany is recorded it's a warmest summer. So we are observing based on the climate data, it's getting more less raining and more sunshine, and it's some part of Germany getting more drought. I mean, drought, it's in terms of scale, it's we can observe in part of in southern Germany and mid Germany, also where I'm living, Berlin. And so we know that in Germany, most of people, in the municipalities, getting the water from groundwater for the daily consumptions. And it has a direct impact on, in the future, aquifer systems, aquifers, and as well as groundwater. And it's not a matter of having a good technology. It's a matter of something, it's going beyond a country, national borders. And that's how we should identify water quality or water resource management is a big thematic area. If the climate, it's climate change, the growth, big thematic, we look at the big themes. And particularly the last time that you mentioned, a special word is adaptations. That's quite, I'm believing in this theme. We see that more people who live in, socially, we observe that disregarded or subaltern peoples, they are the people who lost in this battle, and they will not get enough access to clean water and sanitations. And that's somehow we are trying to address even in our task force as well. Not in Germany, but in around the world. And so see where we could see is the people who are suffering from these resources issues as well. And other things that also we're concerning of, definitely there's the issue of the governance and a policy thematic area. It's a big themes, but anyhow, we also think about individual behaviors. So, and trying to, as a researchers, as scientists, we're trying to give some our inputs, how we could give this knowledge to the individuals, people, not the people in instant, even from the small kids, and into the schools and general society through the formal and informal educations, how we could teach them about to change their small behaviors to be a part of the good missions of the climate change, and how we could adapt our life in the future, and rather than we are waiting for the big changes at the national levels. So in that terms, so we in 2018 we published a compendium for water quality, and in that compendium we try to understand how climate change impact on social conflicts, and so we in international perspective and many cases around the world, and we observe that some of drastic issues, now we saw as a social conflicts and war, but starting point is somehow connected to climate change and plus water. One of the example is South Sudan issue as well. So and in the future, this could be water become more main sources for a conflict among the societies, even currently we see in many parts of the world. And therefore, we have to be more attentive of this based from the basic individual behavior to more macro level changes at the governance and government level. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. And I certainly in the UK, there's, of the immigration topic is a highly political and politicized one. And as we know, that's closely related to climate change and its impact on water particularly. And I think it's, there's a ongoing fierce debate around Syria and whether the Syrian war was, or the level of attribution between climate change and that war. So anyway, thank you. So it's super interesting because we're hearing the importance of education from everybody. And And in fact, in France, we heard the same thing. And, I think, education without a doubt is amazing, but clearly there's some very, very urgent things to do. And education, to my mind, is not necessarily, it might be a precursor for all sorts of things, but it's not an immediate response in an emergency. So, and with that, Caroline, I'll hand to you, because I think perhaps your approach might be slightly different.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Caroline Bader, and I work with Green Faith, a multi-faith grassroots movement. Let me start by reading from a book that some of you may know, just with one verse. So Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the water. So this is something that speaks to people in Germany, because more than 50% of the population are Christian. And worldwide, over 80% of the world's population consider themselves as people of faith or spirituality. Now, the question that we ask at Green Faith and with Faith Climate Justice work is, how do we mobilize them for climate justice? My first COP was 9 years ago, also at COP19 in Warsaw, and Sisira, I'm sure we met there. I was there with an observer delegation with the Lutheran World Federation, and we were not there as official representatives or part of the governance or even part of the mayor groups. Faith communities are still not, but they're always present at COPs. So at COP19, what did we do? We have fasted for the climate. We did not eat, and we prayed much in solidarity with climate victims. This is where the loss and damage mechanism was established in Warsaw. In the following years, we have marched with thousands of people on the streets. We have led vigils and prayers during the negotiations. We organized multi-faith statements, and we have met official and negotiators. But again, faith institutions are not part of the governance of UNFCCC or nor a mayor group to the UN system. But maybe some people in there are people of faith in their respective roles and responsibility. And this is partly where our work as a multi-faith movement can land. In 2015, a group of people from the Philippines embarked on a pilgrimage by foot from Rome to Paris. And I'm just coming back from Rome. I have been there for the past few days to attend an event, a climate event at the Vatican. And I can tell you it's a long way, even by train. So how is this all connected? I want to tell you about this in a moment. For now, I want to take you to 2022, where in my hometown here in Karlsruhe in Germany, we hosted one of the most important faith events of the year. The General Assembly of the World Council of Churches took place with over 4,000 delegates and observers who gathered to speak about the roadmap of that global fellowship of Christians, 352 churches from more than 120 countries, and they together represent the governance of 580 million Christians worldwide. Imagine that number. What was the key issue that they discussed? Climate change. But not climate change as a single issue. And like Diego said earlier, it was connected to the system that is the problem. It was particularly connected to economic justice and human rights. And I want to quote from the climate statement from that conference, because it's so strong and it really moves me every time I read it. Just a few lines. We are running out of time. We must repent from our continuing human selfishness, greed, denial of facts, and apathy, which threatens the life of all creation. Together, we call the world to urgently respond to the following demands for climate and environmental justice, and for governments to join in practical actions and not only commitments to meet the pressing need to avert ecological disaster. And I'm mentioning two of those demands. One, a just transition to renewable energy sources must be expedited. Use of existing fossil fuel sources must be phased out without further delay. No new fossil fuels or nuclear energy projects can be developed. Subsidies to fossil fuel industries that artificially reduce the price of fossil fuel productions must be ended. And the second point, and I mention that because it's important for Germany and people living in industrialized nations, is wealthier populations and countries that are responsible for the bulk of emissions must take the lead in reducing their own emissions and in financing emissions reductions in poorer nations. So this is from the statement which was just released about a month ago. Yes, and we work as a multi-faith grassroots movement here in Germany and worldwide. And as people of faith, we simply want that our moral voices that are so powerfully stated here in that Christian message, and there are many others, there are Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim declarations on climate change. There's so much work happening out there. We want our moral voices to be heard and the right decisions to be taken on climate justice. Because we together as people believe that our planet and all living things are sacred. And that is important. And just like being at the Vatican and listening to Pope Francis again, that sacredness of all life and of every being, including human beings, but also the whole natural world, that is a different understanding than exploiting everything and just taking what you need and just throwing away what you don't need anymore. It's a fundamental question of how we see the world and us as part of that world. And we think that the current destruction of our world is an offense to our beliefs and our well-beings. It is preventing us from living in harmony with the earth and each other. As many of you have said already, we also believe that government action has been inadequate and continues to exemplify that our political leaders are not moving fast enough. We think they have a lack of a moral compass. And that is why we use that moment of before COP27 to mobilize faith communities and actions around the world. It's a month of action called Faith for Climate Justice. But we do that all the time. Yesterday, there was an action in Uganda and Nigeria against gas flaring, against a crude oil pipeline and other things. But also here in Germany, we call on our government, on the corporations and big banks, and ask them to be morally accountable and to strive for harmony with our natural world. So in Germany, is it really the question if it's about heating our homes or reaching the climate goals? Is that really the question? Can we believe that? How can a green government allow to the coal industry to continue for any other day? One example, one local example I want to bring to you is the Christian initiative Kirchen im Dorf lassen, who fights for an end to new coal exploitation in Lützerath and Keinberg. They are part of the big civil society movement there, but explicitly as people of faith. So they stand up against RWE and also against the regional government, the Green and CDU government of North Rhine-Westphalia. And they do that with non-violent and symbolic actions as people of faith. However, they receive threats and they're charged for erecting a cross at the coal pit. The initiative does not understand why the judiciary and police are prepared to sacrifice the protection of domestic peace for the profit interest of a company that is irresponsible about the climate crisis. And here we're talking about RWE, Deutsche Bank, and BlackRock and others. So as Green for Faith, we support their call and we demand those actors to stop any investment in fossil fuels, such as Garzweiler 2 or the EACOP pipeline in East Africa, or you name the projects. One tool of doing that is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. I want to invite you to read it. I want to invite you to sign it. There's only one city in Germany who has signed this treaty. It's the city of Bonn. And I think it should be more. As people of faith, we're also organizing faith leaders to sign it. And just to wrap up, I just want to again say that it's time for more legally binding action on climate change. And we want to continue fighting for climate justice as people of faith. And why? And I'll just end with that book again. Cease to do evil and learn to do right. Pursue justice and champion the oppressed. Give the orphans his rights and plead the widow's case. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you. Yeah, I think calling on moral authority, I think is really interesting, and also interesting to think who in power, profess faith of some shape or form, and whether or not, that's a powerful way of influencing people. So the minister who said, the UK minister who talked about extracting the last drop of oil from the North Sea or whatever, I understand is quite a prominent Catholic, as an example. So potentially a very interesting conversation to have there. So Caroline, please have it. Okay, so thank you, everybody. So some really interesting and sort of diverse insights. So if we could just go back to, and Sisira, I think you've got to go imminently, but So if you want to say something, just shout out. But I think if we just go back, just to cycle through those questions very quickly. I think first of all, so Bertold sort of said, you know, in Germany, you're pretty lucky because, you know, you haven't really seen the impact of climate change. I think, Sisira, you talked about the impact of a warmer summer and the impact on water. We've heard externally quite a lot of noise about flooding, and we've also heard about the Rhine, for instance, you know, drying up and people not being able to navigate it. Now, that might be massively exaggerated, but let me just ask you, how does it manifest really to you in your personal, professional, or, you know, or from reading the papers? How does it manifest in Germany? Is it all about, you know, a big global issue that we've got to help resolve, or are people beginning to feel it locally?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I have to be very careful to generalize for this the idea, because we can't say whole of the populations, you know, and there are so many we see at the small level, grassroots level, there are so many actions going on, activities. We see that Last Generation movement and Friday for Earth and many other youth groups and Bundesjugend and so on, and many organizations, many youth activists are working on, as well as some political parties are working on their party manifestations. They already included climate change as a main thematic area. I mean, we can, yeah, there are some parties, we could say like a climate deniers, but anyhow, majority of political parties also, they have their manifestations of the climate change. And the government policies, definitely they are already take into considerations. And also when we, as I'm a researcher and I've engaged with our colleagues in many universities as a main research jobs, and we observe that the people's, I mean, we saw one idea as people perceptions, and these people perceptions, how they are in German called Wahrnehmung, so how they perceive that climate change as a threat. So what we observe that they have, I mean, we could say in our research samples, we observe that majority for our samples, they know that there's a climate change, and they identify from their knowledge, from their language, this climate change, you know. And particularly this manifestation, when you're talking about that, as I mentioned, is behavioral issues, and they know already from their perspective and their resources, and what will happen in this winter, and what will happen next years, and what will happen to my teenagers and my young kids and so on. That's parents already think about that. And this idea and this identifications is quite important, I would say. And this individual based and very grassroots level based actions and collective movement, it's take more into the national agendas at the political level and policy levels, and that's quite positive way, I would say, in Germany, because somehow most of them, you agree, Germany take leads in the climate change policies at the global level, and they are giving national level grants to establish many UN related organizations and other countries, and also some of NGOs and some of political foundations and other foundations, they are giving some funds. So that's quite interesting and that's quite good. But anyhow, what I would say is that we see that recently issue in Frankfurt Order, you may see that some related to our subject area, water quality issue in a Frankfurt Order between Poland and Germany. And it took some little times to verify what was the reasons. And still at a European level, we have good water quality European framework directives. But anyhow, it's still we see that there are less cooperation between not on the government level, but at least some of industrial stakeholders and some of maybe the municipalities. So this cooperation, it's important to have to address such issues, because and when it's a climate change, I mean, we saw that it's a dry summers and more sunshine, and it will impact on, as I mentioned, the groundwater level. And if it suddenly happens in pollution at the water rivers and tributaries, and it will impact on whole agriculture systems. And we know that there's the famous issue in middle Germany, the Weser River. So Weser River has a high level of salts, and it's because of, I will not say the company names, but there's one of the mining company in top of the water catchment area. So still we are good at in water quality parameters, but in Germany sometimes some areas we have to think about that deeply to how we manifest in our policies and agendas.
Yeah. So I think so yeah, the sort of the concern around water moving into agriculture, etc., is clearly a big challenge. But I think that, you know, that first bit you talked about the perceptions. So generally, you know, it feels like, and I don't know if people would agree, but the citizenship, you know, not only are aware of it, but they are personalizing it as well as an area of concern. And then you're seeing that move into policy, which is a pretty encouraging thought. So anybody else got a view? So again, it's the same question. How is it being manifest? How is it felt? You know, are people, you know, the paper's full of, you know, examples of extreme weather events locally, and then that's translating into concern? Or, you know, do you agree that there's a general perception here that something has to be done in the short term?
I'd say from the building industry, at least, what we're seeing is a huge increase in cost to build and to retrofit, which is, unfortunately, though, we are recognizing very much that we need to, if we are going to build, it needs to be highly energy efficient, and it needs to stand the test of time. And if we are going to retrofit, it needs to be done to make the building more energy efficient. What we're seeing is, as prices rise, people are saying, as we've heard a few times today, like, you know, I don't have the money for it. And so they're still choosing to build to a degree, but they're choosing a lower standard or the absolute minimum. And these tiny steps being taken, as we've noticed the last few years, they're not enough. They're not going to help us meet our goals. And particularly in the buildings industry, it's problematic because these buildings end up standing for 60, 80, 100 years. And, you know, their energy demand is higher than they need to be. We've had solutions for 30 years, sometimes longer. So, you know, making that choice still today tends to be very much emotion and immediacy based, like the cost of the building at the build stage, and people are not thinking long term, like, okay, but what do I do if the gas and oil prices continue to rise? What do I do in the case that there's no glass available to get the new windows that I need when I need to replace these in 15 years? So instead of building for longevity and building for high quality, people are, to a degree, I guess, in a consumer way, panicking a little and not thinking as proactively and unfortunately it's so logically long term as they potentially should. And obviously this is talking more about the private sector for housing and accommodations. With governments and public buildings, you're seeing you know, buildings go out for tender and saying that they need to be at this high energy efficiency rate, and then once the bids come in, they're kind of shifting things and watering it down a little bit, pun intended, Sisira. So I think, you know, this is what we are seeing, and this is a time for us to really be banding together and making sure every action we take is done to the highest quality that we can. And unfortunately, I think in times of crisis or in times of great fear about what's coming, we tend to run around like chickens with their heads cut off. So we do need to focus people once more on making better long-term decisions that are in line with the, you know, the SDG goals and with the COP goals and with everything that goes along that.
So yeah, okay. So despite possibly, you know, citizen concern and understanding and awareness, we're not seeing that translated into purchasing behavior. You know, from your perspective, they're doing it on, you know, because of the cost of materials or whatever else. So that's, you know, and I guess that those sorts of observations are super important because that leads you to a different type of solution. So is it about citizen education or is it about policy or what is it? So anyway, lots of hands up. So should we go left to right? Diego, and then Caroline, then Carolina, and then Caroline.
Yeah, like about this perspective that you talk. yeah, like people have these different perspectives, because to do the project that we are running, we study a lot of behavior, personalities, and psychology, and so on. So it's a very general study. So people have these perspectives because some points. First, the egocentrism of people that don't allow they see the problems in themselves. Like they try to all the times find someone to blame or something to blame. So this is one point. The second point about this perspective is because people have the linear thought. They don't understand the dynamic of the systems. So they just see the direct problems. They don't, they can connect the dots to really understand what happens in the system. So people waterproof the house, cut the trees, and they blame the climate change because the floods. So, but they cause a lot of other issues related with the floods, and they blame the climate change because they don't understand that the behavior that they have at first cause a lot of these too. So to really change these perspectives, we really need to teach people more about systemic thinking and give the ecological literacy to really understand about the relationship that we have with nature. Like right now, we try to create actions to solve the problem about climate change, but most of the actions, they forget nature. They don't try to align with nature. They try to use technology and other opportunities to solve the problem. But the problem is that we create our system inside the bubble that are not fitted with the nature. And this is the problem. We need to understand how nature works to really change our behavior. That is the root of the problem right now, the behavior of our society. So we can change our behavior to align with what happens in nature, what happens with ecology.
So Giorgia, have you got an example? Have you got anything to help us with an example, maybe, or something that we can think about concretely that we should refer into?
Yeah, like the last floods, like in Germany, they blame the climate change, but like Germany have 30% of forest cover, but most of these forests are new forests planted, that most of them are conifers, and only 1% of that of all these forests are native forests that have broad leaves trees that have stratified forests. So when we look to this change in forest, this change the interception of the rain, change the infiltration of water in the soil. This can change the problems that Sisira mentioned about water quality, and all these together create the flood. So if the structure of the forest remain like a native forest with broad leaves and all this stratified structure like a native forest, all the problems about the floods could be different. Like the flood could be 10% only. Like like the problem, it's systemic, and we are just looking to one point, and it's all together.
Got it. So and I think when we come back to you before the end, it would be good. So that's an example of what didn't happen. And I guess, you know, is there an opportunity? So sorry, have you seen something which gives us some hope that we can be that sophisticated So let's come back to you a little bit later, but I think that's the sort of hope. So can we just do then Carolina and then Bertold? Oh, sorry, Bertold, have you got to go, have you? No. Carolina?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, talking about like the systemic problem of climate change, I think like many people feel overwhelmed. This is also what I see a lot on the business side, or also working with supervisory board members. They feel really overwhelmed, and it's, I think, understandable, because it's climate change is often also referred as a super wicked problem, because it's at the one hand you have like competing priorities in your job, where I see that also in my daily business. It's taking care of the cost, taking care of time, and also different priorities. So you need to decide what is like your biggest priority in this second. The second thing is that climate change, as mentioned also by Sisira, is very complex. So people feel overwhelmed also because it's very complex. How do we start to understand? Of course, like coming from a research background, you have tools, you have like risk governance frameworks which you could apply, but it takes time to understand how to work with them. And the third topic is which is often referred at the tragedy of the horizon. Like in business, you often think only to the next year, the next 3 years, maybe also the next 5 years, but climate change has implications on the long run also. So you need to change now things, strategies in your company, and you will see only the results in a couple of years. So people, especially if they are only in the job for, they know they have a contract of 3 years, they need to achieve something in 3 years, so they won't focus on climate change. So I think their policies, the governments, the laws are asked to be more specific, and also tell people, force people from the business side to take care of such topics, and to make them understand that it is their job to take climate change into consideration, which is also a good thing. Like there are a lot of possibilities in it, which we often forget. We always talk about the negative part, but there is also a lot of possibilities for us.
Yeah, and I think the possibility side is, we begin to get into this sort of super interesting conversation about, do we need to call on moral authority, or can we combine quality of life benefits with what we're doing, or so I think, depending on when we fall, and it's probably not one or the other in a binary sense, but maybe different by domain, it does influence obviously what the right approach is going to be. So yeah, I think that concept of opportunity, quality of life benefits is an important one, definitely. Bertolt.
Well, I just wanted to add what Carolina and Sisira said, and just add a example what you asked from Diego. Our point is, before I was a little bit pessimistic. Just to be a little more optimistic, I think we have some success explaining people what we have to do the right thing. Yeah. We have a very small aspect, so we just concentrate on the real estate sector, the building construction and renovation, and say, well, we are responsible for 40% of emissions and energy consumption, and there is a technical approach to reduce CO2 emissions and to reduce fossil fuel use. Yeah, and the only problem is it is a little bit complicated to explain what to do in detail. And on the other hand, when we are working with the engineers who do the construction work, the engineers and architects, I think we are quite successful to explain what is the right thing to do. What we lack is to explain this to the other decision makers, so politics, and the those people who give the money for investment, so the developers of housing and the housing companies. So there is we have to check. But in general, our approach is we can offer a proved system of going for better housing, which is not only less energy consuming, but get a better quality for people to live there, and for everybody, not only for rich people, but as well for those who only can afford social housing. So, by the way, there are many social housing projects here in Darmstadt and Frankfurt, which were done with a very low budget and proved and have proven to be the best energy efficient things what you can have. So there are examples where everybody can follow. So, and the point is, we need too much time to explain it. So I needed just to tell you this, I needed about 5 minutes to get the clue. Yeah, and so explaining this to everybody, it's hard work, and I'm thankful to have the platform like you give here to explain a little bit, and maybe we can go forward. Well,
okay, complexity challenge. Caroline.
Well, thank you to all my colleagues here on the panel, because you make so many important, open so many important aspects and points. I would also say what's happening in Germany. So do people actually start to connect the dots? Do we not only talk about the weather, but about the systems? And here I very much agree. I think it is important, and we slowly start, it's not our culture, but we slowly start to speak about and speak with those who are responsible for it. There's this huge debate if it's individual or systemic change that is needed, or also kind of guilt or responsibility of what's happening. It's not either or, it's and, but let's also talk about those who are responsible, and let's name them. And Sisira earlier on did not want to say the name of the company. I think we have to, because so people know what decisions they make. The other big question that I think is coming up here in Germany is that question of people or profit. So is it wealth and economic growth versus or with climate action? That is really not solved yet, but the question is coming up. And part of that is the growing importance of movements here in Germany. Of course, the Fridays for Future movement has done a huge, huge job, and people start to talk about it over dinner, and that is perfect. And people of faith start to talk about it as well. And what we tell them is to, yes, go and pray, but also speak about it. Get out of your comfort zones. Step out from your church, from your mosque, from your synagogues to the streets too. This has to go hand in hand. And it's not our culture to do that. That's why we really have to learn that. That's part of our education and cultural training that we try. And then on an individual level, yes, change your bank, change your diet, change your business model, change your housing. But do that as an individual and as a family and as a faith community or community and as a thought leader. Be a role model in what you do. We need those role models. That's very important. And finally, I just want to, when we do decisions, no matter if it's at the professional or personal level, there's an indigenous wisdom, which I like very much. And I like that thinking because it's not linear short-term thinking. It speaks about the seventh generation principle. So every decision you make today should result in a sustainable world, in a livable world for 7 generations into the future. And that changes your whole thinking, right? And there's a German word for that too, which I would like to end with. It's called enkeltauglich. Do you decide and live enkeltauglich?
Can you stick that in the chat for me, please? Beautiful.
Thanks.
And to your point about economic, this whole conversation about growth and the economy, and the IMF, you might have seen, has just published something which says, yes, we've got to give up growth. You know, there is going to be a cost, and they see that as giving up an element of growth, and they've quantified it in order to deliver what we need to do. But obviously that's just talking about, you know, GDP, the numbers. It's not talking about distribution of that money, let alone actually more important things, arguably, which is quality of life, security, shelter, you know, I don't know, a house which is pleasant to live in, et cetera, et cetera. So I think moving that debate from, you know, financial currency in a very narrow way, particularly if it's aggregated at a national level, to quality of life, and that might include peace of mind. is going to help in this, and it's going to bring it back to individuals. Because to your point about connecting the dots, none of us are, none of our systems are, but we can all strive and obviously help. Giorgia, you got your hand up.
Yeah, and actually, I think what Caroline said is a really good kind of segue. I just wanted to add, we've talked a lot about the consumer, and I definitely led that discussion there, and the decisions that they make. But I think one of the things that brings me great joy, at least in my work, is to see the professionals in our network, the architects and the tradespeople and the component manufacturers, and everyone along the line doing the best job they can to advise consumers on the best possible design for the building they desire, to make sure that they have done the best possible job of building that design and actually implementing it to not only what the plans were, but also what we really need for going forward and making things enkeltauglich, so ideal for our grandchildren. And I think that that's something that we sometimes forget, is that when you are doing your job, if you're doing it with passion and you're doing it to a high degree, then hopefully the consumer won't have to become a building physicist to be able to get a house that isn't costing them an arm and a leg to heat every winter and then bankrupting them again in the summer when they need to cool. Maybe you don't need 6 people from the city council to take on 6 weeks of training to learn all about engineering principles in order to trust that the new town hall renovation is going to be done properly. I think that that's so important. It's not just an individual decision, but it's a job. It's a decision as part of your job to do it properly and to advise people on what is the best way, so that they can trust you. We do this with, if you purchase a new car or something, you trust that they are going to give all of the safety equipment and all of the stuff that's going to help you in a car accident in the vehicle. Why is it that we look at energy efficiency or at environmental sustainability as an added extra that we need to learn about in order, or pay extra for whenever we make a purchase? That's a good point, and it's a very interesting point to compare it to safety. Okay, so just to wrap up, everybody. So that final question we got to, we're sort of missing out the scaling bit, but we've touched on a little bit of that, I think, and we've touched on some, sort of profound points that I think, Caroline did well to summarize in terms of, the system and some of the big debates. So, do you have to do it on a morals basis, or is it economic? Can you have your cake and eat it, etc. So my final question then is, if we think about, particularly in Germany, but you could go broader than that, but what is it? And it might be that you say, well, you just got to promote passive house, or Diego says it's all about system thinking and you just got to educate that, and Carolina goes, it's all about corporate governance, but it might not be. So if you step outside of your role and your area of expertise, what is it? Where should we place our money? Let's not use money. Where should we focus, prioritize, put our energies in order to respond in the short term to this huge emergency that we face? So what is required to really move the dial? There's lots of good examples of things happening. There's lots of need and lack of things happening that we've discussed. But just in the very short term, we need to do something now. We're supposed to be halving emissions by the end of the decade. So what is your bet? What is your sort of single bet? Is it policy? Is it education? Is it what is it? Carolina?
Yeah, I think everybody should individually start now. So just like begin, do the first step, find something small. In a company, it can be packaging, and being a supervisory board member, it could be to raise the question, a private person to think like, where do I get my groceries? So just start.
Very clear. Diego, Bertolt, Giorgia, I'm still thinking.
Go on.
I thought you were going to call us up one by one. I would be a little more ambitious, and I would say we need a clear fund, and clear guidelines, and clear implementation for energy efficient retrofits. especially in Germany and Europe in general. We have an enormous amount of existing building stock, and they are just pits for energy when we're talking about heating and cooling and hot water and all the things that go into it. It's not something that people can necessarily afford to do alone, and it's not something that people will necessarily do to a high quality level if that isn't enforced. But as we talked about, buildings are an enormous piece of the puzzle, and making sure that there are clear guidelines, clear funding available, and clear implementation necessity will do a large, will play a large role in getting towards the net zero goals.
And Giorgia, without wanting to put words into your mouth, but can we then, if that was done, then that would potentially provide a beautiful illustration, an exemplar of how you reorganize, redesign a value chain to deliver climate-friendly outcomes. And it doesn't have to be in building; it could be in anything else, right?
Yeah, and it's not just, it's not just for the buildings play a part of this puzzle. When we're talking about energy transition and wanting to move away from fossil fuels and onto renewables, with our current bloated energy demand, especially in the building sector, we just can't. And if everybody switches to electric cars, then we definitely can't, because we'll have so much need for that energy. So it's going to be really about looking at efficiency as the first renewable energy in order to switch over to all of those others. And I think that's going to be the most important aspect going forward.
Got it. Thank you. Diego, and then finish with Bertolt.
Yeah, first for me, individually reduce the consumption. This is the biggest problem. Second, we need to rebuild or recover the biodiversity, because from laws that we have in ecology, biodiversity give high biodiversity give resilience. So to build resilience, we need to recover our biodiversity in forest, in our cities, all the places. Reduce the waterproof areas. This can restore part of the water cycle. And yeah, one point that I don't see any government or anybody talking: land footprint. The land footprint is the most precious resource that we have, and nobody talk about that. So we are changing the energy systems, and we don't care about the land footprint. But the land footprint, it's a finite resource. So with that, we need to live, we need to produce food, we need to produce research, we need to produce energy, and nobody cares about the land footprint. So for me, these three aspects are the most important right now to really change things.
So Diego, just to clarify on the land footprint, so
yeah,
go a little bit further, because obviously people do talk a little bit about sort of agriculture and what wilding and all this sort of stuff. But what do you mean by?
Yeah, like a good example. Right now we are changing the energy production to photovoltaic systems, and we are cover a lot of land footprint with photovoltaic systems that change the interception of water, the infiltration of water, change the albedo, that have huge impact in the temperature locally, reduce the biodiversity. So all these aspects, when we propose some change without thinking in the system, we can produce one good thing that in this example is the renewable energy, but in the other eyes, we are creating a lot of other problems that can come up in the near future, like 1, 2, 3 years after. We can rise the temperature locally because we change the albedo in the region. We can have water problems because we change the interception, the infiltration, the runoff. It's all like in ecology, it's all interdependent. So if we work looking just for one point, we can create a huge problem because we miss the information.
Understand, but just to the footprint. So just basically the footprint is what land we use and why, something like that, or how.
Yeah, like we can integrate things. So we can produce energy, we can produce food, we can produce material, we can recover the biodiversity, all in an integrated way. So use more wise the land, because the land is a finite resource.
Understand, and obviously a big challenge. It's a great point, because I'm looking out of the window, I'm thinking everything, all the land around here is privatized, right? And so
yeah,
there is no, there's constraints on what you can do, but there's no promotion of I don't know, any form of biodiversity in your garden, for instance. So that's there's plenty of constraints on what you can't do. There's not very much promotion on what you could do to create better. Great point. Yeah. So Bertolt, just to finish off then, final words from you.
Yeah, well, thank you for you said it. Everything is restricted. Everything is limited. All our human being on Earth is limited. So we do not have unlimited resources for not only for area, for land, but for everything. And I think we should get this back. What our parents and grandparents, they knew about it, so that everything is limited. Well, and the second is, apart from technical solutions, we are with the housing, we offer technical solutions for the housing, but the point is, I think we must come to an end for a compromise, and everybody has to admit and to find a solution so that everybody can check for it. So what to say it? Coincidence, politische. Sorry. Sorry, I'm missing the word.
Can I help?
Politische Übereinkunft.
Yeah. Okay.
It's simple. So we have to check that doing the right thing. It's a decision we have to make all together, and we have to check that we have to find the compromise all together. And there is not well, there might be a golden path, but we have to find it together. And this is, I think, the most important challenge what we have. Our political system, to keep it together so that everybody has to contribute, and not to fight against each other. Yeah. So I will have the word somehow. Yeah. Yes. There has to be a political agreement. Yes, Giorgia.
And we have social contracts and political agreements.
Yes, and we have to find it all together, and not to fight against each other. Otherwise, all our technical solutions will not help us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And well, sorry.
No. That's very clear, and that comes back to some of the earlier points made about polarization. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think thank you very much indeed for your wide-ranging perspectives and contributions. Really, really interesting to hear everything from governance to Diego, your sort of point about this whole system change, which is so important, to obviously something very specific and tested, which is passive house and passive house principles. So absolutely fascinating. But what's interesting to me as well is that we can have a really good conversation, and we could actually extend it for another day. We'd probably have to have some snacks and things like that, but we could work on it together, and I don't think it would feel strange. I think it'd actually feel good, and people's different perspectives, for whatever reason, in this domain, in this part of this topic, it allows us to talk together and try and move forward and agree or disagree or think about it, which is not really something I've encountered in 20 years or 30 years, or is it more? It's probably more actually, of the business world. I just haven't really encountered it. So And that gives me great hope and enthusiasm and, appetite to continue to pursue it. So thank you very much, everybody. Great to have you talking and expressing what you're saying. I will summarize in a few quotes as I've been doing the other ones. So that'll only be just literally a few quotes from each of you. So I'll summarize that. It'll be paraphrased. So you might choose to edit it if you want to. I'll then put the recording up on the website. And then, of course, you can then access that and, promote it if you want to. And look forward to seeing you on the journey, both you and anybody else who's listening. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bertold, your English is excellent, by the way.
I got the word, the consensus. I was looking, we have to check for a consensus, everybody, and all together. This is what I was missing, sorry.